Hello ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and today we're taking a look at a game that just came out, and it is kind of a strange one. This is Submerged, and as the title suggests, and of course you can infer from the main menu background there, I'm just going to move the cursor out of the way, it's about a lot of water, and water where it shouldn't be. See, the setting of this game seems to be something post-global warming. Now, at first it might look like it's a sort of El Dorado-style, colonial-era kind of game, kind of New World era side of things. But very early on, and this isn't really a spoiler because it's literally the first objective in the game, you find military rations, or I suppose emergency disaster relief rations that have been sent to help this sunken city, that are almost definitely from a modern age. So this is kind of a post-civilization game. And it has no combat, so that's another thing to bear in mind. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. First things, the menu options. There's a fair amount of things. It has an auto-detect option, which is fairly reliable. But for the most part, this can run at a decent frame rate on most machines, I would expect, with most of the settings turned all the way up. The only thing would be mainly if you have issues with water reflections in particular, that's going to be an issue for very obvious reasons. Right, so let's get on with it. I'm about an hour into the game, so let's take a look. Now, loading times are a little bit lengthy the first time you run the game, but after that, it seems to sort of even itself out. Right, so you play as this girl right here, who I have yet to discover the name of. I might have missed something at some point, but I haven't actually seen her name anywhere yet. This is a little brother whose name I believe is Taku? I think that's how you pronounce his name, or Taka? But yeah, they're basically orphans now. Both of their parents have, well, something's happened to them. See, the game doesn't narrate any story for you. All of it is a discovery. So this is more of an exploration game that is very heavily story driven. So I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So this is the story thus far. These are basically the first few panels that you get at the top. Alright, so those are the first four, and you get most of these very early on, and they tell you the story. There is no narrator telling you the story, or any text telling the story. It's all these pictures, and they seem very vague at first, and this might be quite frustrating for many people, but as you get more pieces, and it starts to kind of piece itself together. So you can see here, in the third panel, the two children over there, there's obviously one girl and one boy. That would be our main characters here, and of course the taller characters would then be their parents. So you can see just how things kind of went along, and long story short, they're kind of on their own now. There is also a story of the city, and this is the one that you're trying to find out about. So these are kind of pieced together seemingly at random, but it's not entirely random because it depends on where you find these pieces. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But that tells you the story of the city. So this is the city that you're in right now. I'm not sure what the name of it is yet because I haven't found that out yet. But basically it's submerged in water. And you get around, you can see here, there is an invisible wall preventing us from going into the water. You're not going to be swimming anywhere. And we can travel everywhere by boat. Now, animation-wise is pretty good, but there are moments like that, like you just saw with the boat, where there's no animation for getting in the boat. It's just a fade to black, and then you transit across. And it's, well, I kind of would have liked to see something for that, because it seems a little bit out of place, given the rest of the animations are kind of alright. Alright, so this is the telescope, and this is kind of how we find things. So, by aiming at something, you get a location and added to your map. When you're in the vicinity of it anyway, you'll get that arrow that you saw earlier that tells you where it is. Otherwise, you can just sort of peer around and have a look at things. Right, so boat controls are fairly simple. I'm using a controller for this, and it seems to handle fairly well. In fact, it handles exactly like you would expect a boat to. So turning very hard means you get a slight little drift on it, and all that. And you can see it's very alive, actually, the world. It's very empty. Like, it seems very, very empty, but it is quite alive when you see stuff like that. There are whales, dolphins, manta rays, and all sorts of animals all over the place, and they seem to be sort of mutated in a particular way. So, as we go along, we'll unlock more locations on our map. It is actually quite a large map. You can see the extents of it. I haven't gotten very far in it yet, at all, and this is after an hour of playing. But the game, like I said, is basically all exploration and story. There is no combat. And that might seem a little bit strange, because you would expect a game like this to have a little bit of combat, at the very least, but no, it just really doesn't. So we have an overarching objective. We have to help our brother at the moment, who is actually quite ill, and we have to go and find supplies in order to help him, and at the same time, like you saw there, we've unlocked a piece of the story. So let's have a look at where that fits into. That is plot number 3. So we can see here, we've got a little bit more of the story filling up. But it is actually a very pretty game. It has that sort of Disney, Pixar style, I suppose, art style to it, where everything looks realistic, but is sort of cartoonish in its own way as well. But the lighting and water looks really nice, and the animation quality, as I said earlier, is very, very nice. So what is the actual core gameplay of this? Aside from the objectives that you basically have free roam around the city. The only limitation, really, is, I guess, the fact that boats can't go up buildings. Alright, there seems to be something glinting in the distance there. So there might be something there that we can go and have a look at. So, of course, all of these buildings are submerged, and it seems that plants have taken over again, for one reason or another. So, you can go and have a look around and find a way up. Now, I have found that usually flowers tend to indicate that there's something or a way up. Now, you might have seen just there in the disappearing at the bottom of the screen was a humanoid-looking character. And that's another element of the story which is slowly being revealed. There are actually still people in the city, but they're not really people anymore. And before you go, oh no, zombie survival situation, then doesn't appear to be like that. They appear to have some form of sentience and intelligence. So they're not entirely zombies, but it seems that they are very plant-like in nature, and that's something that needs to be discovered along the way. Alright, so it doesn't look like there's an immediate way across there. So we've got to find another way across. And this is where most of the gameplay actually is. It's a sort of climbing puzzle, or climbing adventure, if you will. So every building has different elements. My bad. Has different sort of puzzle elements that you discover along the way. But for the most part, it is still a climbing puzzle. And if this is not your type of thing, unfortunately, there isn't going to be much in it for you. Because this is the whole game, pretty much. It is pretty much entirely climbing and exploration puzzles. And there's a dynamic weather system and day and night cycle that kind of adds to the whole atmosphere. It is a very, very immersive environment, actually. Which might not look like a lot, because after all, it is a city kind of underwater. And while that's kind of an interesting setting on its own, most cities in games tend to be a little bit lifeless. And this, somehow, that lifelessness adds to the effect of all of the aesthetics. It's not just the graphic style, it's also the sound and the way the weather impacts the way everything looks, because you do have a very far view distance in this game when it's not raining like this, so you can see just how dramatically the weather effects actually affect the game. But you do really need to get invested into the story and the setting in order for this to be that enjoyable. Personally, I find jumping puzzles and climbing puzzles to be kind of dull after a while, but I'm not really that into puzzlers anyway. But the setting itself has kind of drawn me in. So that's probably going to be the main draw. If you like that sort of exploring kind of a large world and having a fairly strong story behind it, then this could very well be your thing. So we've just discovered another tile piece. Let's have a look at that. That's number 25 there. So it looks like 25 and 27 are trying to suggest that the buildings, well, I guess as they are now, were submerged, and as were the people, I guess. It does seem to suggest that, because I think the yellow blocks there are actually the buildings. So, fairly easy to figure out. But at the same time, I don't know why that's still flashing, actually. Oh, it stopped. Right, so where are we going now? I don't think we can get back up there. So it looks like we're going down. As far as controls go, I am using a controller. This is playable on a keyboard as well, but I would recommend a controller for this, mainly because third-person games do tend to be a lot easier to play with a controller, but that's just a personal preference thing. It is perfectly workable on a keyboard, though, without too much issues. In fact, the controls themselves are fairly simple, so I wouldn't expect there to be too much of an issue with it at all. But of course, if you do not have a controller, then some of the movements might seem a little bit awkward to do, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Incidentally, the soundtrack that you might be hearing in the background now is very well put together. It's a sort of combination of a piano and orchestral kind of thing, which is very, very nicely put together. Right, so this is a supply box which has arrived here. So as we open that up, we'll get a box. And that appears to be medicine or food of some kind. And every time you find one of these, it brings you back to where... Oh look, the plant people. At least I'm guessing it's plants anyway. You might be noticing as well that she appears to have the same sort of glowing greenness on her skin that the other people in the picture before had as well. And that is also another story element, and it's not there at the beginning, and it seems to kind of grow along, or rather gain intensity the further you play. Now every time you find one of those objectives or one of those supplier crates, you get more of the story behind the two characters. And you can see she's just discovering the greenness on her skin. And that's a story element, actually. So, obviously, she wasn't like that at the beginning. So we need to find something to keep insects away from Taku. So that's the next objective. Now those are linear, but the actual little books around that give you an insight to what happens to the city are not. So that's more of the exploration thing. You can find rations anywhere, but they will still unlock the same thing. So the objectives progress in a straight-up linear fashion. But that's pretty much the only linear thing about it. You can find things anywhere in the city, and you can pretty much go anywhere in the city if you want to. So Yeah, it's an interesting title. The fact that it has no combat and it's just all about the exploration of this sunken city is quite intriguing. I don't normally go for these sorts of games, but this has been one that's caught my interest. And it is a very interesting setting indeed. I'd like to see more of this story and where it progresses to. But I think this should give you a fairly good idea of what this game is really about. So if you are thinking of picking it up for yourself, there you go. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Panzer taking a look at Submerged. It is available on Steam, as well as PS4 and Xbox over the next coming days. But as at the time of the recording, there is no confirmed price yet that I know of. So do check your preferred storefront for more information. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.